The air in the private terminal at Incheon was sterile, filtered to a state of perfect nothingness. Kang Dae-hyun despised it. It was the same air he breathed in boardrooms and sterile holding cells, the air of transactions devoid of life. But today it tasted like ash in his mouth. His gaze was fixed on a single point across the polished marble floor, a woman with slumped shoulders, her face a mask of exhausted resignation, being led by an airline official toward the boarding gate for a flight to Los Angeles. Clara. The name was a whisper in the cavern of his chest, a ghost of a sound that had become the anchor of his world. And she was leaving. No, not leaving. She was being removed. The distinction was a shard of glass twisting in his gut. It was Soo-jin, Min-jun, his ever-present shadow and most trusted man, said in a low, furious murmur beside him. We just confirmed it. She used her father's contacts in the Ministry of Justice. A falsified report on a visa irregularity. An expedited deportation order signed less than 12 hours ago. Clean, bureaucratic, utterly vicious. Dae-hyun didn't move. He watched as the official handed Clara her passport. She didn't even look at it. Her eyes, the same eyes that had once held galaxies of defiance and laughter, were dull, fixed on the floor as if the answers to her entire life's misfortunes were written there. She looked broken, and he had broken her. He had let this happen. The world he commanded, a world of shadows and steel that could bend presidents and break markets, had failed to protect this one woman. Or worse, it had been the very thing to attack her. His ex-fiancée, Soo-jin. He had ended their engagement, a corporate merger disguised as a relationship, months ago. He had thought her pride was the only thing wounded. He had underestimated her capacity for cruelty. He had underestimated the poison he had allowed to fester in the periphery of his life. A cold, silent fury began to build in him, a pressure behind his eyes that was more potent than any shouted rage. It was the kind of fury that dismantled empires. He saw Clara take a step toward the jet bridge, a step that would take her out of his country, out of his life, forever. The world stopped. The sterile air, the polished floors, the distant hum of a jet engine, it all vanished. There was only the sight of her back, the slight tremble in her hands as she clutched her single small suitcase. He finally moved. "Stop her," he said, his voice terrifyingly quiet. It was not a request. It was an alteration of reality. Min-jun was already on his phone, his voice a quiet storm of commands, but Dae-hyun did not wait. He began to walk, his long strides eating up the distance, each step a hammer blow against the silent, indifferent marble. He would not let her go. He would burn the world down first. 3 months earlier, the world had been a different place. For Clara Evans, it was a place of charcoal dust under her fingernails and the lingering smell of kimchi and fried noodles on her work clothes. Seoul was a city that demanded everything from you, and she gave it all she had. She was a fine arts student on a scholarship that barely covered tuition, which meant her life was a frantic juggling act. Mornings were for classes, afternoons for her part-time job at a small, struggling art gallery, and evenings were for waitressing at a relentlessly high-end restaurant where the patrons wore more on their wrists than she earned in a year. Her apartment, shared with her perpetually optimistic friend Chloe, was a tiny box in a neighborhood that was more grit than glamour. It was a life lived on the edge of exhaustion, fueled by cheap coffee and the fierce, burning hope that one day, her own art, her own vision, would be enough. "You look like a ghost who lost a fight with a rainbow," Chloe commented one evening, eyeing the smear of viridian green on Clara's cheek and the dark circles under her eyes. Clara managed a weak smile, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "The rainbow won. My midterm portfolio is trying to kill me, and I have to be at the Gilded Lily in an hour to serve miniature food to giants of industry." "One of those giants might be your Prince Charming," Chloe said, wiggling her eyebrows. Clara snorted, the sound devoid of humor. "The men who eat there don't want a princess. They want a new decoration for their penthouse. I've seen how they look at the staff. Like we're part of the furniture and they're wondering if we'd match the drapes." Her cynicism was a shield, forged in the fires of too many condescending glances and dismissive waves. She was a survivor, and survival meant being wary. It meant knowing that men with that much money and power didn't see people like her. They saw commodities. That night, the Gilded Lily was buzzing with the low hum of immense wealth. A private party had booked the main dining room. Clara moved through the tables with practiced efficiency, her mind a million miles away, lost in compositions of light and shadow for her next painting. She was refilling water glasses, her movements automatic when it happened. Her foot caught on the leg of a chair someone had carelessly pushed out. Time seemed to warp. The crystal pitcher slipped, arcing through the air. Water splashed across the back of a man's impeccably tailored suit jacket. The pitcher hit the floor with a sickening crack, not shattering but splitting, sending a final spray of ice and water across the polished wood. The room fell silent. Utterly, terrifyingly silent. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She was going to be fired. She was so fired. Her entire month's rent gone, just like that. "I am so sorry," she stammered, dropping to her knees, fumbling with a napkin to blot at the man's jacket, her hands shaking. "I'm so sorry, sir." "It's just water." The voice was deep, a low baritone that cut through her panic. It wasn't angry. It was calm, indifferent almost. She finally looked up, past the expensive fabric of the suit, past the broad shoulders to his face. And the world stopped again. Kang Dae-hyun had been bored. The dinner was a tedious necessity, a meeting with a consortium of developers who were either too sycophantic or too arrogant. He'd been listening to a portly man drone on about zoning permits, his mind drifting to the crushing weight of the empire his father had left him. It was a legacy of concrete and steel, but also of shadows and blood, a kingdom he was bound to rule. He felt the familiar loneliness closing in, the isolation of a man who could have anything but could trust no one. Then came the crash. He felt the cold splash of water on his back, an insignificant annoyance. But as he turned, his gaze fell on the waitress scrambling on the floor. And for the first time in a decade, Kang Dae-hyun felt something other than duty or boredom. It was a jolt, sharp and electric, like a live wire pressed to his soul. It wasn't her beauty, though she was captivating in a way that defied convention. Her hair was a messy knot, strands escaping to frame a face smudged with what looked like paint. Her eyes, wide with panic and mortification, were the most alive things he had ever seen. In them, he saw not a clumsy waitress, but a fighter. He saw resilience and a spirit that was currently being crushed by the weight of a simple accident. She was apologizing, her voice trembling, her head bowed. He saw the frantic desperation of someone for whom getting fired was not an inconvenience, but a catastrophe. And in that moment, a fierce, inexplicable possessiveness flared within him. It was primal. It was absolute. "It's just water," he repeated, his voice softer than he intended. He reached down, not to help with the mess, but to place a hand gently on her arm, stopping her frantic dabbing. Her skin was warm. The contact sent another shock through his system. He felt the fine tremor running through her. "Stand up," he commanded softly. She froze, her wide, terrified eyes finally meeting his, and he was lost. It was a universe of raw, unguarded emotion. He saw her struggle, her pride, her fear. He saw everything he had lost in himself. The manager was rushing over, his face a mask of apoplectic fury. "Sir, my deepest apologies. This clumsy girl will be dealt with immediately." "She will not," Dae-hyun cut him off, his voice dropping back to its familiar glacial tone. His gaze, which had been transfixed by Clara, shifted to the manager, and the man visibly flinched as if struck. "The accident was my fault. I pushed my chair back without looking. She will not be dealt with. You will bring me the bill for the pitcher. That is all." The manager stammered, nodded, and scurried away. Clara was still staring at him, her expression shifting from terror to utter confusion. She pulled her arm from his grasp as if burned. Thank you, she whispered, her voice barely audible. She gathered the broken pieces of the pitcher, her movements still clumsy with shock, and fled toward the kitchen without a backward glance. Dae-hyun watched her go, a strange ache in his chest. The developers, the contracts, the entire city of Seoul faded into white noise. He had found something. Or rather, something had found him. He didn't know her name. He didn't know anything about her. But he knew, with a certainty that shook the foundations of his carefully controlled world, that he would. He knew. The pursuit began the next day. It was not a courtship, it was an investigation. Dae-hyun did not do things by half. By noon, Min-jun had placed a file on his desk. Clara Evans, American, art student at Hongik University, financial aid, 2 jobs, address in Mapogu, no family in Korea, a life of quiet desperation and artistic ambition. The information settled in him not as data, but as a map to a treasure he was determined to claim. He felt a pang of something that might have been guilt at the invasion of her privacy, but it was quickly consumed by the overwhelming need to see her again. His first move was the gallery. It was a small, unassuming space tucked away on a side street, smelling of turpentine and old wood. He walked in, dressed in a casual but still ridiculously expensive sweater and trousers, feeling entirely out of place. Clara was at the front desk, sketching in a notepad. She looked up when the bell over the door chimed, and her eyes widened in recognition. A flush crept up her neck. "You," she said, her voice flat. "Me?" he agreed, a small, unfamiliar smile playing on his lips. He enjoyed the way she looked at him, not with the fawning awe he usually received, but with suspicion. It was refreshing. "Are you here to complain about your suit? I can pay for the dry cleaning. It might take me a couple of weeks, but I will pay for it." Her chin was tilted up, a defensive posture he was already beginning to find utterly endearing. "The suit is fine," he said, letting his gaze drift around the gallery. The art was abstract, challenging. Most of it left him cold. But then he saw it. In a corner, a small canvas. A painting of a rain-slicked Seoul street at night, the neon signs bleeding into puddles on the asphalt. It was lonely, but beautiful. It felt familiar. Who painted this? Clara's expression softened instantly, her defensiveness replaced by a quiet passion. "Oh, that's by Lee Jin-woo. He's a student like me. No one's ever bought any of his pieces. But he's brilliant. The way he captures the feeling of the city, not just the look of it." Dae-hyun looked from the painting to her face, alight with genuine admiration for someone else's work. He felt a pull so strong it was a physical force. "I'll take it," he said. Clara blinked. "What? Just like that? It's 2,000,000 won." She said the price as if it were a dare, a sum so impossibly large she was certain it would scare him off. He simply pulled out his wallet and handed her a black, featureless credit card. "And please have it delivered to this address." He gave her the address to his office, not his home. She stared at the card, then back at him, her suspicion returning full force. "Who are you?" "A man who liked a painting," he said simply. He took the card back after she processed the transaction, his fingers brushing hers. Another jolt. For him, a lightning strike. For her, a look of startled confusion. He turned and left before she could ask any more questions. He knew it was a strange way to court a woman, buying art, intimidating her boss. It was the only way he knew how to operate, by applying force and resources to a problem until it was solved. But Clara was not a problem. She was a revelation. He started appearing. At the coffee shop near her university, he'd be sitting at a corner table, reading a financial newspaper, looking utterly out of place amongst the students. He never approached her, but he would watch her, his gaze a tangible weight on her skin. Clara felt like she was being haunted. The ridiculously handsome, ridiculously rich guy from the restaurant is stalking me, she told Chloe one night, pacing their tiny living room. Stalking or admiring from a distance? Chloe asked, peering at her over a bowl of instant noodles. It's creepy. First to the restaurant, then he shows up at the gallery and drops 2 million won on a painting like he's buying a pack of gum. Now he's just there, at the cafe. I saw him outside the library yesterday. He doesn't even do anything. He just watches. Okay, that's a little creepy, Chloe admitted. But also, like, straight out of a drama. Is it legal for someone to be that attractive? It feels unfair. Clara threw a pillow at her. This isn't a drama. This is my life. Men like that, they're dangerous. They think they can buy whatever they want, people included. But even as she said it, she remembered the look in his eyes. It wasn't the look of a man buying a trinket. It was more intense, more hungry. And it thrilled her as much as it terrified her. The next day, she confronted him. She saw him at the cafe, and instead of ignoring him, she marched straight to his table and slammed her hands down on it. The few other patrons looked up, startled. He merely raised an eyebrow, unfazed. "Good morning." "What do you want?" she demanded, her voice low and fierce. "To have a coffee with you," he replied, his expression unreadable. "This is not how you ask someone for coffee. This is how you collect information for a restraining order. You're everywhere. It's unnerving." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. It was a devastatingly effective expression, a crack in his granite facade. "My apologies. My methods are direct. Will you have coffee with me?" He gestured to the empty chair opposite him. Her heart was pounding. Every instinct screamed at her to run. This man was a predator, and she was so far out of her league it was laughable, but her pride, her stubborn defiance, refused to let her back down. And a deeper, more treacherous part of her was curious. She sat. The coffee was a tense affair. He asked her about her art, her studies. He was a surprisingly good listener, his intense focus making her feel like she was the only person in the world. He didn't talk about himself, deflecting her questions with vague answers about being in family business. "What kind of family business requires you to look like you're about to assassinate a head of state?" she asked, her sarcasm her only defense against the pull he was exerting on her. He actually laughed. It was a low, rusty sound, as if he hadn't used it in years. The sound did something strange to her insides. "Construction," he said, the lie tasting like dust in his own mouth. "And logistics." She didn't believe him for a second, but she didn't push. As they left the cafe, he walked with her for a block. The silence between them was thick with unspoken things. "Why me?" she finally asked, the question that had been tormenting her for days. Dae-hyun stopped, turning to face her on the busy sidewalk. He looked at her, and for a moment the mask was gone. His eyes were filled with a raw, aching loneliness that mirrored her own. "I don't know," he admitted, his voice barely a whisper. "When I saw you, it was like I had been holding my breath my entire life and I could finally exhale." The confession, so simple and poetic, struck her with the force of a physical blow. It bypassed all her defenses, all her cynical shields, and went straight to her heart. This wasn't a line. It was the truth. She could feel it. He reached out, his fingers gently tucking a stray strand of hair behind her ear. His touch was feather-light, reverent. "Let me see you again, Clara, properly. A real dinner, no accidents, no stalking." Her throat was dry. She could only nod. That nod was the beginning of the fall. Their first proper date was a world away from the Gilded Lily. He took her to a tiny family-run restaurant in a back alley, a place that served one dish, the best kimchi jjigae in Seoul. He was still wearing a suit that cost more than her car back home would have, but here, hunched over a bubbling stew, he seemed almost normal. He started to talk. Not about his business, but about his childhood, the suffocating pressure of being the heir, the loss of his parents in a car accident when he was 19, a story he told with a chilling lack of emotion that spoke volumes. He spoke of the emptiness of his life, a life of endless obligations and zero personal connection. She, in turn, told him about her dreams, about the way she saw light and color, about her desire to capture not just images, but emotions on her canvas. She told him about the crushing debt left by her father's medical bills, the reason she was in Seoul on a shoestring, chasing a dream that felt more impossible every day. He listened. He truly listened. He didn't offer to fix her problems. He didn't flash his money. He just listened, his dark eyes holding hers, making her feel seen in a way she never had before. At the end of the night, he walked her to the door of her apartment building. The air was charged, thick with an energy that crackled between them. "I shouldn't like you," she whispered, more to herself than to him. "You're everything I'm supposed to be wary of." "I know," he said, his voice rough. He stepped closer, crowding her against the cold brick of the building. He lifted a hand, cupping her jaw. His thumb stroked her cheek. "And yet, here we are." He lowered his head and kissed her. It wasn't a gentle, tentative kiss. It was a kiss of desperation, of starvation. It was the kiss of a man who had found water after a lifetime in the desert. It was fierce and possessive and utterly overwhelming. Clara's mind went blank. All her fears, all her warnings dissolved in the heat of his mouth on hers. She wrapped her arms around his neck and kissed him back with a ferocity that matched his own. A silent admission of the want she had been trying so desperately to deny. Their relationship became a secret world. They met in quiet places, away from the prying eyes of his world and the judging eyes of hers. They walked along the Han River at midnight. They explored ancient palaces after the tourists had gone home, his influence granting them access. He would come to her small studio space and watch her paint for hours, sitting in perfect silence, his presence a steady, calming weight. She was falling in love. It was terrifying. She was falling for a man who was an enigma, a man whose wealth was a mystery and whose past was a locked door. She saw flashes of the other side of him. A phone call would come, and his entire demeanor would shift. His voice would become ice. His eyes would turn to flint. The gentle, lonely man would vanish, replaced by a king commanding his legions. The transformation was swift and absolute, and it chilled her to the bone. "Who are you really, Dae-hyun?" she asked him one night as they lay in the dark of her small bedroom, the city lights painting patterns on the ceiling. He was silent for a long time. She felt him tense beside her. "I am the man who is falling in love with you," he finally said. It was an evasion, but it was also the truest thing he had ever said. But the truth had a way of refusing to stay buried. The intrusion came on a Tuesday. Dae-hyun had taken her to a private gallery viewing, a favor called in for her. They were looking at a sculpture when his phone buzzed with a specific urgent tone she had come to dread. He answered it, turning away from her. She couldn't hear the words, but she saw his posture change. He straightened, his shoulders squaring, a lethal stillness coming over him. "Handle it," he said, his voice a blade of tempered steel. He hung up. "What was that?" she asked, her voice trembling slightly. He turned back to her, and for a second she didn't recognize him. The man looking at her was not the man who watched her paint. This was a stranger, a dangerous one. Then he blinked, and Dae-hyun was back, but his eyes were haunted. "It's time you knew," he said, his voice heavy. "Everything." He took her to his home. She had never been there before. She had imagined luxury, but she was unprepared for the reality. It wasn't a home, it was a fortress, a penthouse that occupied the top 3 floors of a skyscraper he owned, with panoramic views of Seoul. But the inside was cold, impersonal, and sterile. It was furnished with priceless art and designer furniture, but it had all the warmth of a museum. It was the loneliest place she had ever been. They stood before the floor-to-ceiling windows, the city sprawling beneath them like a carpet of diamonds. "My father didn't build a construction company, Clara," he began, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. "He built an empire, The construction, the logistics, they are the legitimate face of it, a very profitable face. But the roots are in darkness. They are in the businesses that operate in the shadows. He was a gangster, a very powerful one, and when he died, he left it all to me. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. Gangster. The word hung in the air between them, ugly and violent. I am the head of the Kang family, he continued, his gaze fixed on the city below. It is not a title I wanted. It is a cage I was born into. It is a world of violence, of brutal competition, of alliances and betrayals. I have done things, Clara. I have made decisions that have hurt people. I am not a good man. He finally turned to look at her. His face was a mask of self-loathing. This is who I am. This power, this wealth, it is stained. And loving me means being stained by it too. It means being a target. It means living in a gilded cage, protected by men with guns. The confession landed like a series of blows. Every fear she'd ever had about him coalesced into one hideous truth. The man she loved, the man who had shown her such tenderness, was a kingpin, a mob boss. The beautiful world they had built together was a lie, a fragile bubble floating over a sewer. Tears streamed down her face, hot and silent. I can't, she whispered, the words tearing from her throat. I can't do this. Clara, please, he begged, taking a step toward her. For the first time, she saw true desperation in his eyes. He looked broken. I can protect you. I can keep you safe. Safe? She let out a choked, hysterical laugh. Your world is what's putting me in danger. Dae-hyun, I'm a painter. I work 2 jobs to get by. My principles are all I have. I can't be the woman who smiles and arranges flowers in a gangster's penthouse while he does whatever it is you do. The pain on his face was so profound, it was almost a physical entity in the room. Don't say that. It's not who you are. But it's who I would become, she cried, backing away from him. I'd be your beautiful, clean thing, your redemption, but I'd be living a lie, bought and paid for by a world I despise. I would lose myself, Dae-hyun, and I can't do that, not even for you. I love you, he said, the words raw, torn from the deepest part of him. The words shattered what was left of her heart. I love you too, she sobbed, and that's why I have to leave. Goodbye, Dae-hyun. She turned and ran. She ran from the penthouse, from the sterile elevator, from the silent, imposing lobby. She ran out into the night, back toward her own gritty, real, and now heartbreakingly empty world. She didn't look back. If she had, she would have seen him standing at the window, a solitary figure in his glass tower, watching her go, his perfect world crumbling to dust around him. The days that followed were a study in gray. Clara tried to slot back into her old life, but the pieces no longer fit. The hustle felt pointless. The exhaustion was no longer tempered by the hope of seeing him. She went to her classes, her waitressing shifts, her gallery job, moving like an automaton. The vibrant colors of her paints seemed to mock her. She would stand before a canvas for hours, but all she could paint were his eyes, dark and full of a pain that mirrored her own. She would destroy the canvases, her frustration and grief pouring out in ragged sobs. Chloe tried to help, offering bad movies and ice cream, but she couldn't breach the wall of misery Clara had built around herself. You did the right thing," Chloe said softly one night, finding Clara staring blankly out their small window. "You stood by your principles." "Then why does it feel like I cut out my own heart?" Clara whispered, a single tear tracing a path through the charcoal dust on her cheek. For Dae-hyun, the world lost its flavor. He immersed himself in his work, but the fire was gone, replaced by a cold, surgical ruthlessness that unnerved even his most hardened men. He was a ghost, haunting his own life. The penthouse was a tomb. The painting he had bought from the gallery, the one she had loved, leaned against a wall in his office. He would stare at it for hours, the lonely street scene a perfect portrait of his soul. Minjun watched his boss with growing alarm. "Sir," he ventured one day, "this is not sustainable. You are destroying yourself." "I am exactly where I deserve to be," Dae-hyun replied, his voice empty. He had offered her a cage, and she had chosen freedom, even if it was a freedom filled with hardship. He respected her for it, and that respect was another turn of the knife. He had never wanted anything or anyone the way he wanted her, and his very nature had driven her away. The irony was a bitter poison. He had a passive surveillance detail on her, not to control her, but to protect her from a distance. He had told himself it was to ensure no rival ever saw her as a weakness to be exploited. It was a lie. It was his only remaining connection to her, a phantom limb he couldn't bear to sever. The reports he received were brief, clinical, and agonizing. Subject attended classes. Subject worked her shift at the restaurant. Subject appears to be in a state of emotional distress. Meanwhile, the whispers of his obsession had not gone unnoticed. Choi Soo-jin, the daughter of a rival-turned-ally, the woman he was supposed to have married, had heard them. Her engagement to Dae-hyun had been a strategic move to unite two powerful families. His abrupt cancellation of it had been a public humiliation. Seeing him throw it all away for some penniless foreign art student was an insult she could not stomach. Clara was a loose end, a symbol of her own rejection. Soo-jin was not a woman who accepted defeat. She operated not with the overt violence of Dae-hyun's world, but with the insidious cruelty of the elite. She made a few calls, pulled a few strings. Money moved through untraceable channels. A file was flagged in a government office. It was clean. It was quiet. It was a stiletto heel to the throat, disguised as paperwork. The official notice came to Clara's apartment on a rainy Thursday. It was a formal, terrifying letter from the Korean Ministry of Justice. Her student visa had been audited and found to have irregularities. It was revoked, effective immediately. She was to report for deportation within 24 hours. It made no sense. Her paperwork was perfect. She had renewed everything on time. She called the immigration office, her voice frantic, but was met with a wall of bureaucratic indifference. There was no appeal. The decision was final. Panic, cold and absolute, seized her. She was being kicked out of the country. Her school, her jobs, her entire life here evaporated. Chloe helped her pack a single suitcase, both of them crying, neither understanding how this could happen. Clara's mind reeled. Was this Dae-hyun? Was this his way of punishing her for leaving? No, it couldn't be. It wasn't his style. His style was direct confrontation, not this sneaky bureaucratic nightmare. But then who? The question was a luxury she couldn't afford. Her time was up. The alert on Dae-hyun's phone was flagged with the highest level of urgency. Min-jun burst into his office without knocking. "Sir, there's a problem. Clara Evans is at Incheon Airport. She's being deported." The empty void inside Dae-hyun ignited. Deported. The word was an absurdity. "On what grounds?" he demanded, already on his feet, grabbing his keys and jacket. "We don't know yet. It was fast-tracked. Looks like a visa issue, but it smells wrong. I'm on my way to you. We'll meet you there." The drive to the airport was a blur of fury. He broke every speed limit, his mind racing. This was an attack. Someone had targeted her. Someone knew she was his weakness and had moved against her. The thought that his world had finally touched her, had hurt her in this way, filled him with a self-hatred so profound it was nauseating. And so he found himself in the sterile air of the private terminal, a place he had arranged for her to be moved, to give him time. He watched her across the marble floor, a broken doll being led to exile. That was when Min-jun delivered the final, devastating piece of information. It was Soo-jin. The name detonated in the center of his being. Not a rival, not an enemy. The woman he was once supposed to marry. An act of petty, venomous jealousy. He had been so consumed by his own misery that he had failed to see the threat coiled right beside him. He watched Clara take that first step toward the jet bridge, and the cold fury within him solidified into a single, unshakable purpose. "Stop her," he said, his voice quiet. Min-jun was already speaking into his phone, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This is Min-jun of Eugen Development, on behalf of Chairman Kang Dae-hyun. The deportation order for Clara Evans, flight KE-017, is to be rescinded. Immediately. Yes, I am aware of who signed it. That person is about to have a very bad day. Consider her visa reinstated under the chairman's personal guarantee. Hold the plane." But Dae-hyun didn't wait for confirmation. He walked. He moved with a predatory grace that parted the air in front of him. Airport officials saw him coming and instinctively stepped aside. He reached the gate just as Clara was about to step onto the jet bridge. "Clara!" Her name on his lips was a sound that broke through her daze. She stopped, her back still to him. She slowly turned, her face pale, her eyes wide and haunted, glistening with unshed tears. Seeing him there felt like a hallucination, a final, cruel trick of her grieving mind. "Dae-hyun," she whispered. He didn't say another word. He closed the remaining distance in 2 long strides, wrapped his arms around her and pulled her against his chest. He buried his face in her hair, inhaling her scent, the scent of home, of life, of everything he had almost lost. He held her with a desperate strength as if he could physically fuse her to him, making it impossible for anyone to ever take her away again. "You're not going anywhere," he murmured into her hair, his voice thick with emotion. "I am so sorry. This is my fault. All of it." She started to tremble in his arms, the tears finally falling. She didn't push him away. She clung to him, her fingers gripping the fabric of his jacket as if he were the only solid thing in a collapsing world. I thought you—" "Never," he said fiercely, pulling back just enough to look at her, his hands framing her face. His thumbs wiped at her tears. "I would never hurt you. I would burn this city to the ground for you." And in his eyes she saw it, not the cold kingpin, not the lonely man, but a terrifying, beautiful combination of both. A man who would indeed burn the world for her. And in that moment, her principles, her fears, they didn't matter. All that mattered was the undeniable, earth-shattering truth. She loved him, and living without him was not living at all. He leaned in and kissed her, right there in the middle of the airport terminal, in front of the officials and the flight crew. It was not a kiss of passion, but of reclamation. It was a desperate, public, soul-deep promise, a seal on a new contract. The airport incident was the cataclysm that changed everything. For Dae-hyun, it was the final, brutal confirmation that his 2 worlds could never coexist. As long as he ruled the shadows, Clara would never be safe. She would always be a target, a vulnerability. He could not protect her from a world that he himself commanded. He had to choose, the empire or the woman. For the first time in his life, the choice was easy. 2 days later, he called a meeting of the family elders, including his uncle, Chairman Kang, a man who embodied the old ways, the ruthless traditions Dae-hyun had inherited. They met in the same sterile boardroom where his father had once ruled. Dae-hyun walked in, not with the weary deference of an heir, but with the absolute authority of a king about to abdicate his throne on his own terms. "The Kang family is going legitimate," he announced, his voice ringing with finality in the silent room. 100%. As of today, we are divesting from all gray area enterprises. We will sell the nightclubs, the lending operations, the security firms with questionable contracts. Everything. We will absorb the financial losses and focus entirely on Eugen Development and our logistics arm. Our business will be clean. The old ways are over." The room erupted. His uncle slammed his hand on the table, his face purple with rage. "You are a fool. You are spitting on your father's legacy. You would throw away generations of power for a foreign girl?" Dae-hyun's gaze met his uncle's. It was cold steel. "My father's legacy is a prison, And yes, I would throw it all away for her, in a heartbeat. This is not a negotiation, it is a declaration. You can either be a part of the new Eugen group, or you can be a part of its history. The choice is yours. He turned and walked out, leaving chaos in his wake. It was a war, but a war he was determined to win. He dismantled his father's empire with the same ruthlessness with which it had been built. He cut ties, exposed rivals, and burned bridges, weathering the financial and political fallout. He made enemies, dangerous ones, but for the first time he felt free. He did not cage Clara. He went to her small apartment, which now felt more like a home than his penthouse ever had, and he laid his future at her feet. "I'm changing," he told her, his voice stripped of all artifice. "I'm tearing it all down. For you. For us. It will be a smaller world, a less powerful one, but it will be ours, and it will be clean. But I need you to know, I am still the man who is capable of doing what is necessary to protect you. That part of me will never change." Clara looked at him, at the exhaustion and determination in his eyes. He wasn't just a kingpin trying to be better. He was a man making a grand, painful, terrifying gesture of change. He was choosing her, not as a possession, but as a partner. "I don't want your cage, Dae-hyun," she said softly, taking his hand. "I want you. The real you. All of you." 1 year later. The light in the studio was perfect. It streamed in through the large industrial windows, illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air and falling across a half-finished canvas. The painting was of a man standing before a window, looking out over a city, his back to the viewer. He was a solitary figure, but the colors were not lonely. They were hopeful. Clara stepped back, dabbing a brush against a rag. The studio was hers. Not a gift from Dae-hyun, but leased with the money from her first sold-out gallery show, which had been arranged by a curator who loved her work, not a man who loved her. The independence was vital. It was everything. The door opened and Dae-hyun walked in. He looked different now. He still wore expensive suits, but the tension was gone from his shoulders. He was the CEO of the Eugen Group, a powerful and respected, if smaller, construction and technology firm. The shadows were gone from his eyes, replaced by a quiet contentment she had put there. He came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist and resting his chin on her shoulder. He didn't look at the painting. He just looked at her. "The light is good today," he murmured, his voice a low rumble against her back. "It is," she agreed, leaning back against him. They stood there for a long moment, in the quiet of the afternoon, two survivors who had found their way to a peaceful shore. His world was no longer a cage, and hers was no longer a struggle. Together, they had built something new. He turned her in his arms, his gaze searching hers. "I love you," he said. The words were no longer desperate or raw. They were calm, steady, and infinite. "I know," she whispered, rising on her toes to meet his lips. The kiss was not one of reclamation or passion, but of deep, abiding peace. It was the kiss of coming home. It was a kiss that promised tomorrow, and all the tomorrows after that. This story teaches us that true love is not about possession, but about transformation. It highlights that even those who seem trapped by their circumstances or a dark legacy have the capacity for profound change when motivated by a love that is pure and selfless. It suggests that real strength isn't found in power or control over others, but in the vulnerability and courage required to tear down one's own walls and build a new, better world for the sake of another. The narrative champions the idea that love can be a redemptive force, powerful enough to cleanse a stained past and pave the way for a hopeful future built on trust and mutual respect. We really hope you enjoyed this educational piece of content and hope that you could understand the moral lessons behind it. If you found this story moving, please give it a thumbs up, subscribe to our channel for more dramatic romances, and share it with someone who believes in the power of second chances. Now, we'd love to hear from you in the comments. Do you think Clara was right to leave Dae-hyun initially after his confession, or should she have stayed and tried to change him from within? And looking ahead, what story should we tell next? Let us know your choice. A. The story of Min-jun, the loyal second in command, and the unexpected woman who challenges his unwavering duty. B. The story of Soo-jin, the vengeful ex-fiancée, and her path to either ruin or her own twisted form of redemption.